What's the difference between informal and formal English? When should I speak formally and informally? Can I use slang, expressions, and phrasal verbs when I'm supposed to be speaking formally? Well, in this week's episode of British English Pod, I'm going to speak to you all about informal and formal language in English whilst speaking and using lots of advanced words and phrases. And of course, having fun at the same time. So I hope you're ready, and let's get started. To begin, let's kick off, let's get the ball rolling with a few warm-up questions, just like the questions that I would be asking you if, of course, you were one of my students in class. And here is a reminder and a little bit of a gift, a little bit of a present. Because, of course, in my group classes, British English Immersion Club, well, every week we look at the topics from the podcast. And I thought I'd be generous. So if you look in the video description, you will see a coupon code. And that coupon code will give you 50% off your first month as a member of my group classes, which is a monthly subscription. And with that, you can join one of the 13 classes that I offer for B1, B2, and C1 levels. And of course, I teach all of the classes. So if you're interested, check out the link in the description. And from there, let's get started. Now, seriously. So, first question is, do you know more informal or formal language? Well, I've got to be honest. I don't use a lot of formal language. To be honest, I think when I'm teaching, when I'm chatting with my friends, with my family, I use a lot of phrasal verbs, a lot of expressions, a lot of idioms and colloquialisms. And usually I find that that's what a lot of my students struggle with. And I think language over time is becoming more and more informal. Because maybe 50 years ago, we would use phrases like, "Excuse me, sir, may I go to the toilet?" Whereas nowadays, it's going to be very rare that you hear such a phrase. It might just be, "Excuse me," or "Oi, can I go to the toilet?" Or "Would I be able to go to the toilet?" So personally, I think language is becoming more and more informal, and I use a lot of informal language because, I think it's also a way of connecting with people. So that's my first response. And related to this topic, a few random questions. When was the last time you dressed up formally? Well, in my case, the last time that I dressed up formally was about a month ago when I went to Seville and I put on a tie and a shirt and a jacket. I was looking dapper, which is a nice advanced adjective. Dapper means very smart, very fancy, and it's in particular used with men when they're wearing a suit. So last time I dressed up formally was at the fair in Seville. I was looking dapper. Next question. Do you use different words when speaking to different people? For example, if I'm speaking to my boss, or if I'm speaking to an old man or lady, would I change the register? Because I know, for example, in French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian, it's common to change the way that you would speak to someone depending on who you are speaking to. However, I think this is much less common in English. I think maybe our language is perhaps not more equal, but we don't change the register and the tone quite as much when speaking to your elders. So, of course, there might be some subtle differences, but I'd say usually the words and phrases that I use wouldn't change that much if I'm speaking to elderly people, for example. Then when it comes to people in managerial positions or bosses, the way I've always got on with my managers or bosses, which there aren't that many to speak of, to be honest. I've always tried to have a close relationship with them, to get on well with them, to get along well with them. So I didn't treat them with too much respect, I don't think, because I like to see that we are equal. I don't look up to my bosses and treat them as if they were my superior because, I believe in equality. But what about you? Would you change the vocabulary that you use depending on who you're speaking to? Let me know in the comments. And then one more question before we move on and start having a look at some more specific differences between informal and formal English language is, have you ever watched The Crown or Downton Abbey? Because these are maybe the best series to get to know very royal, old-fashioned, and formal language. And I don't think they're the best series to watch to improve your English, because a lot of the vocabulary is very specific to royals and very, very posh people. And nowadays, not that many people speak like that. I think it's only like 2 or 3% of the population of the United Kingdom would speak like the characters in Downton Abbey and The Crown. But nevertheless, if you do want to improve your formal English language, then I would definitely recommend The Crown. Not only because of improving your language, but you can learn so much more about the culture and history of the United Kingdom tied to the royal family. And I'm not the biggest fan of the royal family, to tell you the truth. If I had to choose, I would probably prefer a republic. But I do see that the British royal family bring in a lot of tourism, which brings in a lot of money. And I recognize at the same time that is very closely connected to our culture. So I'm kind of on the fence. I'm in between two minds when it comes to the royal family. And I don't know that much about them. I've always been a little bit ignorant to it, which sounds bad, I know, but I'm coming clean. I'm confessing to it. That, for example, my mum, she knows so much more about the royals than me. And there are many other people around the country that strongly believe in the British royal family. But I reckon it's kind of 50-50. But when I was watching The Crown, I was really, really enjoying it. I was thoroughly enjoying it. And the main reason was for historical reasons, that I didn't know lots of different things happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. So it was kind of like teaching me about my own country's history, but at the same time, getting to know more or less what the royals were like. And of course, I know that it is fictional as well. So it is based on true events, but they take a little bit of creative liberty to make it more interesting than the reality was. So that's The Crown, and I thoroughly recommend watching it. And Downton Abbey, I've never watched it. I've heard really good reviews from other students saying, I want to go to the UK because I want to see all of these mansions and these villas and these abbeys that appear in Downton Abbey because I love the accent and it's so quintessentially British. But I've never watched it. So if you have watched Downton Abbey, let me know and you can tell me whether you would recommend it or not. So should I watch Downton Abbey or shouldn't I bother? Let me know in the comments. And from there, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to show you some examples of the differences between informal and formal language. One of these sections is using the active and passive voice. So when we're using the active voice, it tends to be more informal than using the passive voice, which is a bit more formal. And the passive voice is also used a lot when it comes to journalism and reporting, which, of course, related to the news, is usually more formal than informal. So an example. Informal. Our technician repaired the fault on the 12th of June. Now it's your turn to pay us. That's a little bit more informal, using the active voice. And a similar way to say the same thing in a more formal way would be, although the fault was repaired on the 12th of June, payment for this intervention has still not been received. We have two cases of formal and passive language here. The fault was repaired and the payment has still not been received. So I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but generally, if you use the passive, it sounds more formal than the active voice. Now, the second example. Verb form, using phrasal verbs and Latin-rooted verbs or words in general. And, as you might guess, when we use phrasal verbs, it tends to be more informal. And when we use Latin-rooted words, it's normally more formal. For example, the company laid him off because he didn't work much. The company laid him off because he didn't work much. To lay someone off is to fire them because, well, maybe you don't have the resources to maintain this worker. And a synonym, or another way of putting this in a more formal way, is his insufficient production conducted to his dismissal. His insufficient production conducted to his dismissal. Ooh, sounds very posh, doesn't it? So insufficient comes from Latin, and conducted also comes from Latin. And this is another example of how to make it sound more formal. And number 3, using language, whether it is direct or formulaic. The more direct it is, the more informal. The more formulaic it is, the more formal. For example, I'm sorry, but informal versus we regret to inform you that. So I'm sorry, but, and we regret to inform you that. Another example. I'm happy to say that. Informal versus we have pleasure in announcing that. So on the one hand, I'm happy to say. On the other hand, we have pleasure in announcing. So there you can see some more comparisons. The more direct it is, the more informal it is. Now, number 4, the use of slang. Yes, the more slang we use, the more informal it is. Of course, you knew that. For example, he had to get some money out of a hole in the wall. A hole in the wall is a slang phrase to say a cash machine, an ATM. So he had to get some money out of a hole in the wall versus he withdrew the amount from an ATM. So there you see that if we use slang, it's usually more informal. Number 5, using the personal form and nominators. What does this mean? It sounds like gibberish almost. Let me give you an example. This is the informal sentence. If you lose it, then please contact us as soon as possible. So if you lose it, this is directly referring to you, the personal form. Comparing it with any loss of this document should be reported immediately. So any loss of this document should be reported immediately. This is using a nominator, essentially making it less personal and more impersonal. So it could be speaking about anyone rather than directing it to you. And if we direct it to you, it's more informal. Good. Hope that's clear. Now, number 6, linking words. And we're going to have a look at the difference between some informal connectors and formal connectors. But here with linking words, let's have a look that there are many linking words, connectors, that make language sound much more formal. For example, informal. The bank can't find the payment you say you've made. Here, there are no linking words. It's direct. And compare this with, notwithstanding that the payment has been sent, the bank fails to acknowledge it. Wow. And I think this is even too formal. Because notwithstanding, it's not really used. So, sometimes there are formal phrases that I think are very outdated, very old-fashioned, such as the vocabulary that you might see when watching The Crown or Downton Abbey. But we've got some more examples of informal and formal. This next one is revitalized sentences. For example, anybody or any company. This is informal and normal, but in many legal contexts, you might see a phrase like any natural person who and any legal entity which. So when it comes to drafting contracts and speaking about law, we tend to be quite formal. But a lot of this language goes over my head and the head of many normal people, except lawyers. And what about with modal usage? So, when we use modal verbs, there are some cases when it is more formal. For example, informal. If you need any help, give us a call. Formal. Should you require any assistance, please feel free to contact us. And this is even using an inversion. Should you require, which is a way of saying if you need. Should you require any assistance, please feel free to contact us. And to make this even more formal, instead of saying please feel free, I would probably say please do not hesitate to contact us. And we've got one more example, and then I'll stop rambling using all of these formal and informal phrases. So, singular and plural person. An example, I can help you to solve this problem. Call me. I can help you and call me. So if we use I and me, it's more informal. Then the formal equivalent would be, we can assist in the resolution of this matter. Contact us on our toll-free number, for example. And of course, this is because it's coming from a company, an entity. It's not coming from one person, so it needs to be more formal. So, how was that? Was it all a little bit gibberish? Was it confusing? Because, as I said, I personally use informal language 90% of the time. Better yet, maybe 95% of the time. So don't worry if this was a little bit complicated, but I encourage you to recap these examples to see the differences between formal and informal language. But now, let's go over some more differences. But these differences, I think, are a little bit easier. And we're going to turn it into a bit of a game. What do I mean by a game? Well, here we have 10 different informal verbs on the left. And I want you to try to think of the formal equivalent. Ready? Do you think you can do it? Let's hope so. So, buy. Buy. What would be a formal version of buy? Well, we could say purchase. I purchased a new laptop. I bought a new laptop. Next, to help. What would be a formal version of help? We could say assist. Excuse me, how can I assist you? Excuse me, how can I help you? Next, we have fix. Fix. What's a formal equivalent? Well, we could say repair. He repaired my bike. He fixed my bike. Next, we have tell. Tell. If it's formal, you could say inform. I informed them about the problem. I told them about the problem. Then we have need. What would be the formal equivalent of need? Well, it is require. Should you require any assistance, we will help you. If you need any assistance, we'll help you. Then we have a couple of simple phrasal verbs. Go up would be, of course, increase. Prices are increasing. They're going up. And the opposite, go down, of course, is to decrease. You could say that, I don't know, public security is decreasing. It's going down. It's reducing. Then we have live. Live. If you want to sound a bit more formal, you could say reside. In the past, I used to reside in Spain. Then we have use. A formal version of use would be utilize. I utilized all the resources available to me. And last but not least, we have let. Let. I let you do it. Or I permit you to do it. And we can have permit or allow. Both of them are a little bit more formal. Okay, so how was that? How did you get on? Did you guess most of them? If you didn't guess them in time, no worries. But now let's practice them, because I have a list of questions using these formal verbs, and I'm going to choose a few and ask myself these questions. So, what was the last thing you purchased online? What was the last thing you purchased online? Oh, well, I don't do a lot of shopping. But the last thing that I purchased online was... what was it? I think I might have purchased some shoes, but that was quite a long time ago. Honestly, I'm not sure what the last thing I purchased online was. That shows how little I go shopping and how little I buy new things. But I think probably some trainers a few months ago. Next question is, have you ever tried to repair something by yourself? Have you ever tried to fix something by yourself? And here I'm going to be blunt, because I'm terrible at DIY, and I'm not good at fixing things. I'm not good at repairing things. So I think I tried to change a light bulb maybe last year, and it was difficult. I couldn't do it. So I know I need to improve on this, and I can't always depend on others to repair things. So maybe I'll sign up and do a course about becoming better at DIY, because I think it's necessary. Absolutely necessary. Next question. How do you usually inform people about important news? How do you usually tell people about important news? Well, of course, it depends on the news, but because I live abroad and not in the same city as my family, then usually I'd schedule a video call. So maybe on a Sunday evening when I know I'm going to be chilling, my family are going to be chilling, that would probably be when I'd send a message and say, hey, are you free? Or hey, are you busy? Or hey, have you got a minute? And then I might video call my family and inform them about important news. But of course, it depends on the news, obviously. Another question. Let's go with, would you like to reside in another country one day? Would you like to live in another country one day? Well, I'm residing in a different country than my home country at the moment. So, yeah, I'd like to reside in Spain again in the future. And I'm always open to different adventures. So, who knows? If there is an interesting opportunity in a different country, then I'd be open to considering it, to thinking about it. So, yeah, I would like to reside in another country one day. What about you? Would you like to reside in another country? And if so, which country would you like to reside in? One more question, and then we'll look at some more phrasal verbs, I think, in this case. What apps do you utilize most during the day? What apps do you utilize most during the day? What apps do I use most during the day? As you can imagine, I utilize Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, also Gmail. I use Strava as well to track my runs. I use CapCut, which is an app that I focus on for editing my videos as well. So I spend a lot of time on my phone, as you can imagine. And these are the apps that I utilize the most. Excellent. Let's keep going. And now I want you to guess the phrasal verb. I think that was it. Yes. You see, I created this PowerPoint just yesterday, so I haven't taught it yet, but I will be next week in class. So, here, if you look at the screen, on the right, you have some formal verbs. To be honest, they're not exactly formal. I'd say they are neutral. But we're trying to differentiate. So they're quite neutral, maybe slightly more formal than the phrasal verbs that you're going to try to guess on the left-hand side, which are classified as informal. And they're all pretty common, so let's go through them. Do you know a phrasal verb which means relax? I guess so. It is calm down. Calm down. Calm down, mate. Relax. Now, do you know a phrasal verb which means discover? Discover. I guess so. And it is find out. I found out some amazing information the other day. I discovered it. Do you know a phrasal verb which means to maintain? To maintain. It is keep up. For example, I keep up to date with the news. I maintain myself informed. How about collect? What is a phrasal verb which is the equivalent of collect? Think about when you're driving. You pick up your friends, your family, whoever it might be. So pick up and collect, they're synonyms in 9 out of 10 cases. What about reduce? A phrasal verb for reduce? Well, you could cut down. I'm trying to cut down on alcohol at the moment. I'm trying to reduce my consumption. Then we have discard. Discard. A synonym of discard is throw away. you put it in the bin. I'm going to throw away my old shirt because it's got a tear in the middle of it. Then we have mention. To mention a topic in a conversation would be bring up. You brought up that interesting topic. Let's discuss it. After that, we have indicate. Indicate. A phrasal verb is point out. Oh, you pointed out that there is a connection between those two. You indicated it. Then finally, we have accelerate and decelerate. What are the phrasal verbs? We have speed up, and of course, the opposite is slow down. So if you quickly compare these phrasal verbs with these normal verbs, you'll get the impression that the normal verbs are slightly more formal. So of course, we can use phrasal verbs at work in professional environments, but most of them tend to be a little bit more colloquial and informal than the normal verbs. And for me, that means that they are more commonly used and they're more natural. And that's why I focus on phrasal verbs so much on my podcast, on my daily videos, and my YouTube videos, because I think they are key to sounding as natural, fluent, and native as possible. And to continue giving you some comprehensible input, now I'm going to choose a few more questions and answer them using these phrasal verbs. So, how about we go with, do you throw away old clothes or donate them? Do I discard them or donate them? Now, when possible, I try to donate my old clothes or give away my old clothes. But sometimes it's a bit of a hassle. It's quite a lot of work taking it to a charity shop. So in that case, I have no choice but to throw them away. Perhaps this is something that I could improve on, and it's something that I could work harder to stop doing. But I'd say usually I have good intentions and I want to donate them. But if I see that they've got little tears, that maybe they smell bad, they're discolored, then I just throw them away. But in some cities, you have these specific bins for old clothes. So when possible, I throw away my old clothes into these bins. Next question. Has a teacher ever pointed out one of your mistakes in a helpful way? Has a teacher ever pointed out one of your mistakes in a helpful way? Remember, to point out is to indicate. Well, I'd like to think that in all of my classes, I try to gently point out my students' mistakes. First, I'll write them down in the chat so they can become aware of these errors. And then, if students continue to make the same mistake, I might politely say, hold on, give me a second, wait. Remember that you should use this word and not that word, for example. But yeah, how about you? Have you ever had any teachers that aggressively pointed out your mistakes? Or have you been lucky enough to only have encouraging teachers who will gently point out your mistakes? And one more question before we move on is, well, how do you usually find out about important news? How do you usually discover important news? I think most of the time I'm scrolling up and down on social media, and that way I will, of course, follow different news providers, and that's how I tend to find out. There are other times when friends or family will bring up that topic of conversation, and that's how I'll find out. And well, when I'm maybe editing a video or I'm preparing a lesson plan, I'll have a look on BBC News and just see what the latest news is to see if anything urgent is going on. So that's how I find out about important news. Good. All right. Now we have some connectors. So we've already looked at some normal verbs, the difference between informal and formal. We've seen some phrasal verbs and normal verbs. And now let's look at some relatively informal connectors, linking words, with some more formal equivalents. Are you ready? Set? Let's go. So, but, of course, isn't necessarily informal nor formal. It's neutral. But a more formal way of putting it would be however. However, it sounds a little bit more formal, and of course, it's a way of contrasting information. Today I'm very tired, but I'm still working a lot. Today I'm very tired. However, I'm still working a lot. Next we have so. So. What is a formal equivalent? We could use consequently, as a result, as a consequence. I am almost at the end of this podcast, so I'm going to edit when I finish. I'm almost at the end of this podcast. Consequently, I'm going to edit it when I finish. Ooh la la. Now, number 3, we have anyway. Anyway, this is quite informal. A more formal way of putting it would be nevertheless. And it depends on the context, of course. There is nuance to a lot of these connectors. But anyway, let's keep going. Nevertheless, let's keep going with number 4, and it is plus. Plus. Plus, again, it's quite neutral. But a more formal way of saying it could be moreover. In my case, I never actually say moreover. I might write it, I'll read it, but when I'm speaking, I never say moreover. So that's something to bear in mind. Then we have number 5. Then. What's a more formal equivalent? It could be subsequently. First I did that, then I did that. First I did that, subsequently I did the other thing. Then we have or. I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do the other thing. I'm going to do this. Alternatively, I will do the other thing. So or and alternatively are basically the same, but alternatively is much more formal. Then we have a lovely informal connector. It is on top of that. I mentioned that I never say moreover when I'm speaking to my mates or my family, but I use on top of that loads. And on top of that is another way of saying moreover or furthermore, which is more common than moreover, but it's still quite formal. Then an easy one, for example. Instead of saying for example, to sound slightly more formal, you can say for instance. For instance. Then number 9 is that's why. That's why. That's why is another way of saying therefore. I didn't sleep very well last night. That's why I'm so tired. Therefore, I'm so tired. And then, finally, we have no matter what. This weekend, I'm going to run a marathon. No matter what. No matter what happens. No matter what the weather's like. This weekend, I'm going to run a marathon regardless of the weather. Regardless of what happens. I'm going to do it regardless. I'm going to do it no matter what. No matter what. So there you have another little comparison between some formal and informal connectors. And well, that's pretty much it for this week's podcast. Of course, here we've got more vocabulary and more focus on the language itself compared to other weeks when I'm speaking, and beating around the bush and rambling. So don't worry if you prefer me to just have a little chat about random things, then rest assured that next week I'll be speaking all about houses and accommodation, and I'll be chatting away. Chatting away. I'll be talking for England. But now, as I've mentioned a few times, I'm going to, well, edit my video. And in 45 minutes, I have my evening classes for the British English Immersion Club. And as I said at the beginning of this video, I've been feeling generous. So if you'd like to try my group classes, then you can enjoy half price for the first month of the subscription just by scrolling down and clicking on the link in the video description. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message on Instagram, or you can email me as well to lewis@englishwithlewis.com. That's lewis@englishwithlewis.com. So thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.